Wackademia is the wacky world of academia. Never short of material, are we, Rita and James? But on this one, we wanted to take a slightly different look, and this is to congratulate a very good friend of this show. In fact, she was on this show originally, her first time on television. One of her first times on television was, of course, here on Outsiders. Jacinta Price, now Senator Jacinta Price. She has made a very important speech and comments this week regarding our children, how they are being educated in basic racism. So Senator Price has come out and she said this cultural training, which is rife throughout schools, has elements of critical race theory in it, elements of The Voice, elements of overt Indigenous training. All of it is basically designed to make Aboriginal youth feel separate and different and victims, and not up to the task of being educated properly. It's insane stuff, but this is happening in our schools. Jacinta Price has spoken out against it and said we've got to stop this, and she's so right to do so. Some of the stuff that's being touted in this cultural training, James, you have things like, let's not teach Indigenous kids at school, let's teach them at home because it's whatever. It is separating Australians by race. It is wrong, and Jacinta Price has called it out, James.
Well, yeah, and she's absolutely right to. I mean, because all of this stuff at heart, and I think this is Jacinta Price's point as well, is that it says it's trying to treat Indigenous kids as, as just as good or better than anybody else, but actually it's treating them as second-class citizens who are not entitled on the basis of their race and their skin color out of some misguided virtuousness to the same education that everybody else gets, and the same education that, they're going to need just as much as any other kid to get and be competitive, in the modern Australia and the Australia of the future.
Absolutely, Rita.
Well, all of this critical race theory, supposed anti-racism, whatever you want to call it, so much of it is founded on the bigotry of low expectations. Yep. It is essentially telling people that you are not as good as, it's not your fault you're not as good as, but these are all the things we're going to do to address that. And it's really quite ugly. As someone who's someone of colour, a person of colour, as they say, I find this stuff just disgusting because it is not just patronising, it's really quite destructive. It's telling young kids who've got every opportunity, who've got every possibility of succeeding, telling them, no, you're going to have huge hurdles in front of you based purely on your ethnicity. And that's just the system, and there's nothing you can do about it. When we know, in fact, the system goes out of its way to advantage, particularly when it comes to going to university, Indigenous kids, because you get preferential treatment for ATAR scores and the like, so we can increase representation. The whole thing is so toxic. It's just plain out racism. Some people like to call it reverse racism, but you know what? It's just racism.
Absolutely.
That's what it is.
And something that doesn't often get discussed much, James and Rita, is that The Voice will basically entrench the concept of victimhood into the Constitution. The concept of victimhood and a vast bureaucracy will be built up relying on the idea of victimhood of Indigenous Australians. And we've seen every time a bureaucracy is built up, mission creep extends beyond and beyond. We see it time and time again. These big government bureaucracies never go into reverse. So you will have an entire structure that relies and demands that Indigenous Australians suffer victimhood status. And as Rita says, the bigotry of low expectations will be ingrained, and the perversity and the sickness of all this is that it will be ingrained in order to keep these high-paid, well-paid bureaucratic jobs and machinery of government functioning, because they can point to more examples of victimhood rather than treating everybody as equals in Australia and providing every possible opportunity for Australians of all colour, of all races, to succeed on their own merits, James.
Because, of course, this voice, if it gets up, is going to be staffed by and run by the activist class. These are not people who have any, it is actually against their interest to close the gap. They will all be on big six-figure salaries. They will have very little to do with the actual, life of Indigenous people, whether they're, living in a suburb of Sydney or living, in outback Australia. They'll have very little to do with those sorts of experiences and of people who are just trying to do the best they can and do the best for their kids they can. They have a vested interest in actually keeping the problem going, because there's no point ever in any of the talk about this that says, and when we hit these targets or when this happens, then this is over. Wrong. No. So, in fact, these people are going, Indigenous Australians are going to be saddled with the low expectations and high salaries of everybody who's involved with The Voice, presuming to speak for them, when in fact they just want good policy made just like anybody else. It is racism. It's a terrible, reverse racism, if that's the word, but it is just, going to hurt the cause of making sure that everybody, has the same sort of chances and opportunities as everybody else.